Hey there, welcome into this edition of Midweek. I'm Owen with Heights Church out in Prescott, Arizona. If you don't know who we are a church out in Prescott. We get together every week here online, Wednesdays at 7. And what we do is we extend conversation coming from our weekend services and try to really walk it out in practical ways. So today we're going to be walking out some ideas that came from this past Sunday, coming out of 1 Thessalonians 4, talking about, and we got some things to unpack. So we have some disagreement among our guests today on what this is about. So it's going to be good. If you didn't catch our weekend services, don't worry. On this YouTube channel, you can go ahead and view this Sunday's message. And then you can also make plans to join us in person at 8:30 and 10:30 at our Prescott, Arizona campus. And then right here on this YouTube channel at 10:30 and 6 online. So however you want to catch up with us, we're here. We're also here on this YouTube channel throughout the week with things like morning coffees on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So a lot of ways to connect. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, and all of that. But without further ado, I got some guys to bring in. There are two people you may recognize and one brand new face. So without further ado, here we go. Welcome them in to Midweek. Here they are. We got Brian back with us, Brian Maltrip. Pastor John with us again, like he is.
Hey, Owen.
What's up, John? And then we got a new guy with us. His name's Earl McCrae, part of the team here at Heights. And Earl, it is our custom here on Midweek. When we have a brand new guest, you get your very own customized walk-up music. And I know you've been waiting for this like all morning.
Is it customized?
Well,
if it's the same ditty for everyone, is it customized?
Well, I think I'm overselling it a little bit.
Not you, Owen. You'd never do such a thing.
I'd never overhype it. Never. And I can tell by the nervous look on your face.
Yeah.
So here it is. Are you ready?
Let's do it.
All right, here we go. You got a large man with a tiny instrument, and here's your walk-up music. So, welcome to Midweek. Earl,
welcome,
Earl.
Glad to be here, guys. Thank you for the invite. First of all, it should be exciting. Really excited to talk about the message yesterday, and just to get to hang out with you guys at this level is awesome.
Yeah, man, we love Earl and Brian, both of you guys. You got matching gear on. We can see you got those Elements hat. Brian's got the hat. Earl's repping with the hoodie. So Earl, you are honestly one of my favorite people we have on our Heights staff. You're just the best. Love you tons. People that don't know you yet are missing out. So, I mean, your title is what? Director of Recovery. You want to what in the world that means? What's a typical week look like for you? What's God put on your heart for our town?
Well, I'm not exactly sure what director means, but they haven't gotten rid of me yet. So I think something is working. I got here to Prescott 7 years ago by God's plan, not my own. But since then, I've had the opportunity to watch God work in my life in a way that I never expected. And that is through other people that have struggled with some of the same issues that I have, and literally getting to do life with God at the center versus self at the center. And that's kind of the idea of our whole recovery ministry is someone came alongside me and said, I don't care where you've been. All I care about is where you're at today and where you're going in the future. So we've kind of broadened that idea into the recovery ministry of, we don't care how you show up. We're glad you showed up. We care about where you are today and where you could potentially be in the future. And that has really blossomed into a very, very positive kingdom work for Heights Church.
So I feel like recovery is one of those things that it's kind of below the surface. Like if Heights were an iceberg, the weekend stuff obviously is very visible, some of the things we do online, but recovery is like a huge, huge ministry. It's a huge part of what we do. One of the best things, honestly, we have going. I think it feeds so much into the life of our church. Mm-hmm. So can you just describe, for those who have no clue that it even exists, what's recovery ministry look like? What's some of the aspects of it? what's the kind of people that you're interacting with and helping out?
Well, we're blessed to live in Prescott, Arizona, and it has been called the recovery capital of the West because there's a lot of people that just kind of wake up in Prescott and they're trying to recover. I mean, that word recovery is a pretty broad term, but if you break it down to what are you trying to recover from? You try to recover from it. The ministry is the opportunity that God continues to present in front of each of us on a daily basis, or let's call it a 7-day work week, however you want to look at it, is endless. And as we get into this weekend's message, it will start to make sense as to this opportunity that we have to show up because of what God has done inside of us, to share that love with others while staying balanced of self and others.
All right. So what are some of the aspects of recovery ministry? Obviously, elements is one piece of that. Maybe describe that a little bit, and then some of the other aspects of recovery ministry here at Heights.
Okay, so a normal week looks like in this season, right? Let's call it this season. We do 4 separate groups on 4 separate days and nights where treatment centers, recovery homes have invited our ministry in to lead a Bible study. Now, these Bible studies, they don't look like the normal Bible study. It's really not sit down, open your Bible, read some scripture, talk about what it's like. Because of everyone's story, there's a certain realness that comes out when we're talking about scripture and talking about the word. And we do that 4 out of the 5 days in the work week while meeting. What Brian, last week we did an inventory sheet on how many contacts we have on a weekly basis during this season, Corona season. I think it was over 170 contacts per week. So there's the opportunity in it right there to get real while keeping God at the center of a conversation. It's huge. It's amazing. It's amazing to get to see the light turn on in someone's eyes that have pushed away the Bible, pushed away religion, but you spin it on the perspective of a relationship. Then the light starts to turn on. Then you see some surrender. Then you see someone start taking some positive action to actually allow God to change them instead of trying to do it on their own.
That's beautiful. All right. So let me ask.
It's a lot of in everything from intentional one-on-ones to large group formats. Like Elements is our 12-step recovery meeting, which is everyone that's recovering from addiction to just life in general, and any part of life. And then there's a Wednesday night men's Bible study. There are, like Earl said, he's going into recovery homes all days of the week and just meeting up with, whether it's one person or multiple people at a time. It's sort of a constant on-call ministry that we get to do.
Oh yeah, and I know in this season there's been so many extra challenges emotionally on people, like all throughout the year. You guys have been hopping.
Yeah, we have definitely not skipped a beat. If anything, our workload has doubled because the rate of relapse through the roof, rate of overdose through the roof. When you get society telling a drug addict to isolate, oh man, that's pouring gas on the fire. That's a difficult situation, and that has just really given us so much opportunity. Like Brian said, but we get to do this. We don't have to do it. Just like the Thessalonians back in the day, they got to do what they were doing. They didn't have to do it. And there's the perspective of balance.
That's beautiful. What do you guys see right now? I'm putting you on the spot a little bit, but what's a celebration right now? What does a win for Jesus in this season look like right now that you guys are just kind of excited about?
You know what? Staying clean for 24 hours at a time is a huge celebration, because at the end of it, you, me, Brian, John, any of us listening to this, that's all we have. Yesterday's gone. today's here and tomorrow is, tomorrow isn't here. So if we can do the best of our ability for 24 hours straight, dude, that's a miracle in my eyes, because then that sets us up to actually try and do it again tomorrow.
Yeah, I like looking at every day that our eyes open up, that's God started out on a pretty good note, I'd say. So then how do we move into that day, every moment, and then with hopefully the opportunity to do it again tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome, man. I know you guys have been literally a lifeline to so many people in this season, just checking, calling, your presence, keeping people going one foot in front of another, one day at a time. And that's the work of Jesus, man. So just, you don't hear enough, but just thank you. We're just blessed and so thrilled to have you guys part of our team.
Absolutely, man. I can echo all that. Curious, because we always hear the negative side of 2020.
Mm-hmm.
What are some positives that have happened in your guys' world with Elements specifically because of 2020 that kind of opened doors, or relationally things have happened that you hadn't anticipated going in? Have you seen any of that stuff?
Yeah, I think in my opinion, in this season, it has eliminated so much gray in people's lives to where it's very black and it's very white. In normal society, it's very easy to get busy, say with work, with family, with this or that. And staying busy, then you don't have to focus on yourself. And with the lockdowns, with the masks, with the isolation, it is forcing people to start to take a hard look at themselves. And they're allowed to make a decision now where they either go hard left or they go hard right, because that gray is eliminated. And unfortunately, the numbers say, if you're a statistics guy, that a majority of the people went to the wrong way, went down the wrong road. They went to that hard right instead of, which is a worldly direction if we want to look at it at the black and white. And but I think that's a cool way that God and Jesus works in our life. Is there's an opportunity that he's removed some of this busyness from life, and it has allowed us to start to make some of these hard decisions, or start to actually look at ourselves in the mirror instead of just run past the mirror. And because of that, a lot of people have really just kind of come to the point of surrender. And, the word talks about that. If we're not in a mindset of surrender or brokenness, the word says that Jesus came as a physician, right? Well, a physician on the world today does what? He fixes hurt people, right? You got a broken bone, you go see a physician. Well, if in our hearts and our souls, we ain't to the point of surrender or broken, then how can Jesus do work on us? And the brokenness that people are experiencing during this lockdown, during this season, is astronomical. So yeah, we can call it workload all day. It's through the roof without a doubt. But the opportunity that God has put in each and every one of our walks from our experience to relate with this brokenness, I wouldn't change a day in my past because of what I get to do today.
That's awesome. It's funny you mentioned that, and I wonder what your thoughts are, Brian, on this, because in a lot of ways, obviously, you guys are dealing with recovery. There's some substance, issues or behavior issues. But I think what you said, Earl, is completely true for every one of us. Like that, we're all in a weird way in the same boat. 2020, where life has gotten stripped back. All the things we depended on, to prop up our lives, whether it be social hangouts, maybe for some it's finance, for some it's health, like all of that is just been shown to be on shaky ground, and it's really driving us to either abandon, and our faith and just panic, or for us to actually double down into trusting that Jesus has it. And that he's enough for us to make it through.
Yeah, I think as a society, we are dependent on other people and those interactions so much that, like Earl said, this time has provided, or this season has provided time. It's provided time and opportunity, and I think that, so many of us, I know I was for sure afraid to spend time with me, myself and I, all three of us inside, you know, and especially with God. And you said it earlier that, it's not, this is all God's work. God is doing the work in this ministry. Earl, myself, our leaders, anyone in the ministry, we're just conduits of that. And we've been able to take this time to better develop those tracks to allow God to work through us and extend the reach of it and all of that. So it is hard. But, when we can look at the opportunity as opposed to, an obligation, it's an opportunity to reach others and to reach out to people, and that we get to connect in whatever way we can.
Well, it's interesting that call back to the basics, which I think has literally, if you had to sum up 2020 in a word, maybe it would be basics. Let's get back to basics. And this Sunday, Ron brought us a message from 1 Thessalonians 4. And I think in some ways it really is a call to just that, right? Like, let's get back to the basics. And so I thought this might be a good time to pivot in and kind of hear your guys' thoughts as you process from Sunday. It occurs to me, I don't know if you guys indulge me here for a second, I'll read the verses. That way, if our people who didn't get us on Sunday, they can catch up, and then we can just kind of jump in and see where it takes us. Mm-hmm. So this is 1 Thessalonians 4, starting in verse 9. It goes like this. It says, "Now your love for one another, we do not need," let me start over. "Now about your love for one another, we do not need to write you, for you yourselves have been taught by God to love each other. And in fact, you do love all of God's family throughout Macedonia. Yet we urge you, brothers and sisters, to do so more and more. And to make it your ambition to lead a quiet life. You should mind your own business, work with your hands just as we told you, so that your daily life may win the respect of outsiders, and so that you will not be dependent on anybody." That's 1 Thessalonians 4, 9 through 12. So here we are, working back on that. And one word that stood out to me in this, thinking about it and hearing the message on Sunday, was this word ambition. That's a pretty interesting word right there. And I think, I'll be honest, I've heard this verse before, but it kind of struck me like, wow, is that my ambition? To lead a quiet life? So I wonder, you guys, Brian and Earl, what strikes you about that? Does that sit in an interesting way with you, this idea of your ambition, what you want out of life, your aspiration to this idea of a quiet life? How does that sit with you and maybe the recovery crew that you spend a lot of your time with?
Well, our crew is definitely not quiet. I don't know. I love the verses. I think that Ron did a phenomenal job of breaking it down for us this weekend. And I'll be honest, I don't know if I fully agree with everything that he was saying, but I do fully agree with every word that's in this book.
Okay, good recovery there. I thought you were going to agree with the Bible for a second. I was like, okay.
And I love Ron with all my heart.
Midweek just got real.
Yeah, I love Ron with all my heart, but we have the relationship where we can be completely honest with each other. And I think that that's kind of what this verse is diving into. Like, verse 9, it says that we've been taught by God to love one another, right? So I can love Ron with no problem. But as we go further down the verse, how am I loving myself? Do I really know how to love myself? Or am I just good at loving Ron? And when it's talking about attend to my own business. Well, how am I attending to my own business spiritually? Am I just focused outward on everything else that's going on, whether it's in my control or out of my control? But at the end of the day, I'm going to bed by myself. So how am I loving myself? How am I tending or attending my own business spiritually? You know, I get into that. And then at the end of verse 12, it says, from this version, it says, so that you will behave properly toward outsiders. Okay, I've already learned that from God. And not be in any need. Is that referring to I have to go to work every day so that I can receive a paycheck and not have to call Ron and say, hey man, I need dinner, because I was sitting and waiting for this to come to me, but it never did. I just think that there's so many different directions that a person could read into this. But the main thing that I want to stay focused on in these verses is I'm going to use the word balance. You know, we've been taught by God how to love one another, but how am I loving myself? Is it all outpouring? And at what point am I being poured into?
Yeah, it's good stuff. Good stuff. I mean, John, we were talking, I see you about ready to jump in here, talking about, you know, when you're looking at a passage, context is everything, right? Like it's not in a vacuum. There's the man who wrote it. There's the people he wrote it to, or she wrote it to. In this case, it's Paul. You know, and there's a backstory to it. And you were helping us kind of get a handle on some of that backstory that maybe gets Earl, you know, untangled here a little bit. He's struggling.
Yeah, it's interesting. I hadn't thought about it till you were just talking, Earl. But he commends them for loving each other well.
Mm-hmm.
So that to me would be within the church.
Right.
What's interesting is the end of it that you just read. It's about how they are towards the outsiders, which makes me wonder. I haven't done, like I had, obviously Ron just spoke on it, so I haven't even done any digging on this to be accurate, but I'm curious what the testimony to the outsiders was versus because inward, Paul's commending them. He's like, do so more and more. Outwardly, I'm curious what was happening outwardly to go, hey, this will actually give you a good rapport to those outside. Which is kind of, I hadn't even thought about that till you just read through it. But yeah, we were just chatting before. I think what's interesting with the church there in Thessalonica, like there was so much going on from a political standpoint and from if you like, an empire standpoint that they were having to deal with and navigate through. And, you know, and so the idea of getting, for me, when I hear the phrase, make it your ambition, aspire to, you're aspiring to something. And he specifically says, if you're going to aspire to something, then let it be this quiet life. Right. And I think Ron did a good job of everything in our culture is the opposite of a quiet life. No one's at peace. I mean, you guys see it front row and center every single week, like people trying to find inner peace that can only come through Jesus. Without Jesus, it's just turmoil, and you're chasing stuff that can't sustain it. And so I think it's interesting with the context there of when it gets to the mind your business. I was just saying earlier, for me, I've always read that in the context of, man, there's so much that could sway you from what really matters. You could get caught up in all these things going on within the empire realm and what you think is right and wrong with what Rome's doing, and whether you think the persecution of the church is, you know, and you can fight all these battles. And I kind of feel like it gets pulled back to the basic grassroots of, hey, let's anchor down and let's care. You're loving each other real well. Let's care about the outside the church. Let's care about the empire. And let's make sure that we're striving towards this applying of, if you like, simple basic principles of don't get caught up in that. Live out your faith, kind of like what you're saying, Earl, that individual living out of my faith. This isn't a corporate, like, hey, church, this is speaking on an individual level of, hey, on an individual level, make it your ambition to find this inner peace through Jesus. Yeah, you're doing great outward, inward. Let's not get caught up in all this crazy stuff going on around you. Let's anchor in and work with your hands, back to basics. That's that phrase to me, the work with your hands. Yeah, I know it's physically get to work, don't sit around. But I also think there's an element of that that's just kind of like, man, back to grassroots, and, and step into it. So I don't know. How does this mind connect with the rest of it?
Well, and early in the year, this was way back several years ago, back in January, we had the Rhythm series, which is super great. By the way, it's still here on YouTube. If you're looking for more of this like quiet life and what that's about, you're going to find there's a nice parallel in that Rhythm series. Because when you look at this idea of a quiet life, John, while you were talking, I cheated and looked in a bunch of my nerdy, Bible study tools over here. And basically it's this idea of being peaceable and orderly. And I think there's so much to this. Like God's heart for us is to have a life that's full of rhythms that are healthy for us. Like rather than, I know like I like excitement. I literally am very bad at like establishing personal habits and rhythms that are healthy. But this is kind of what God wants for us, is this like rhythm of structure and order to our lives. And I think it's because that frees up bandwidth for us to go back to the top of this thing where the section where it's all about loving others, right? So it's like, don't have a chaotic life, like where you're just own too many things, have no habits, like just, living knee deep in chaos all the time. Like strive for that peaceful, orderly life. So then I have time and emotional and spiritual bandwidth, to then take care of people around me who need it. And I think that, honestly, this is kind of my, interpretation a little bit, but when it talks about minding our own business, I think that's our business. Like our business is God's kingdom. This is what we're here for. This is why Jesus has rescued us. It's why we're here. It's why the Thessalonians were there in Thessalonica. It's why we're here in Prescott. Like minding my business is not, telling everybody to butt out necessarily, although sometimes people need to not be busybodies, and all that. But there's a lot more of this idea of like aligning my time and my resources so that I can free up space to be about God's kingdom, his business, which is now my business because of Jesus. And I think there's something deeply powerful about that. Just simple life with lots of space for people, money, time, everything freed up.
Well, and I'm just thinking, Owen, that peaceable and orderly, like throw that into your guys' world, Brian and Earl. Like essentially what you're getting when someone first shows up in your guys' scope of ministry is chaos. Like, and it's just spun way out of control. And essentially what through the journey and introducing, Jesus to their world and seeing a genuine step of faith into that. And then the growth is actually bringing that peaceable, that quiet inner that the Spirit only brings, along with just this orderly, like, you guys have both said it's this 24-hour span. We got 24 hours, man. How are we going to order them? How are we going to live them? And then tomorrow we got 24 if we wake up, right? And so I think there's an interesting correlation there, even to what you guys were sharing before with the peaceably and orderly and how that connects.
Yeah, what stands out to me in these verses is live a quiet life. And quiet is the absence of noise. And so when people come into recovery, a lot of it is chaos and noise filled, whether it's internal noise or external noise. And then in this minding our business, being concerned or tending to these issues in our relationship with God, moves into the work with your hands, for me, I think of like a product. What are we producing? Like I mentioned earlier, like a carpenter makes a chair, but he doesn't make all of his chairs for him. He makes them for other people to sit in. And so with this like minding and tending to this noise and hopefully getting, being free of that, we can win the respect of outsiders so that we're not dependent on anybody. The last verse is that our relationship with Christ, our works, what we're producing isn't dependent on another person, but it's dependent on the work and relationship that we have with God, and that we're developing free of that noise from the outside.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Owen, I got a question for you.
All right. Oh boy.
In regards to work with your hands, okay?
Yeah.
In your opinion, does that mean be an example? Or, well, let me reword that. Does that mean be attraction or promotion?
What do you mean?
I mean, we have two tools. We have our mouth and we have our hands.
Yep.
Do you think this verse is pointing at people to be an example through their actions versus the words of the mouth?
Oh yeah, I think there's a big part of that. And I think it's because, how we handle our business as believers in this world, I think is the number one way that we validate our faith. Like, am I really putting weight in this? Like, do I really believe that if I follow Jesus, he's going to take care of me? Mm-hmm. Or am I still scrapping, clawing, like using all the tricks everybody else uses to try to get ahead and like secure my own position in life? It goes back to, I just thought of this, it goes back to Old Testament, the idea of the Sabbath, right? Like God set up his people with this very different pattern of life where they had this one day a week they rested, Mm-hmm. And then, they're farmers and like ranchers. I don't know if you've ever, have you ever known a farmer or a rancher to take a day off? Like, hey, they'll be fine. Animals will be, like that's a big ask, but it was intended to remind the people that God was taking care of them and not themselves. They weren't just hustling and making the life for themselves that they wanted to have. And so, man, I think so. I think that the way we keep our business centered around God's kingdom business is my business. And then the way I go about my work, whether it be, I'm a pastor, so that's my work. The way I go about it, I got to be free from all the shady business that sadly pastors get into, right? Because that's how, I can win the respect of outsiders. If you're carpenter, you work with your hands, you create quality products, you solve problems in your world, and you add value, and you don't try to rip people off. Like the way we handle our business is an example, and it's much more valuable than our words, right? Talk is cheap, right?
It's interesting. I cheated and looked something up, but what it was saying specifically with it, and I didn't know this prior to just reading it, so it's that fresh. But what they were saying was happening in the church was people taking advantage of other people's wealth. So when it came to loving each other well, part of taking advantage of the love of another person towards was people with more were helping out those with less, but the people with less were actually not stepping in and working with their hands. Mm-hmm. And so they were, and again, it's one resource, and I just read it and haven't even had time to process it. But just that, again, the concept goes back to what you were even talking about earlier, Earl, of okay, now I'm taking advantage of this love relationship versus like, okay, God, what have you put in my hands? What have you put for me? And how do I step into that? Which makes a lot of sense on a physical scale that's happening. And then the example of that, going back to what you were just saying, Owen, the example of how that would ripple out from the church is now a negative example of who Jesus is, what he does, and walking alongside, providing, putting in your hands what you need, as well as then to the outside world going, well, they're just, a couple of rich people and a bunch of lazy bums that just sit around and don't do, like testimony wise, it was impacting the community in a negative way of what love actually looks like. So sorry I cheated.
Man,
I think that's the first midweek I've ever cheated.
Man, did a little background there, a little research. Well,
So,
I think that's great. It's a great contribution. And I think we got to keep in mind, like our goal as believers is not to be like independent islands too. Like back to looking at the end of this thing, verse 12, it says, work with your hands, lead a quiet life. And there's two purposes for it. It's so that we win the respect of outsiders. And then we're not dependent on anybody is how the NIV says it. But the goal we know from the rest of Thessalonians, we know from Paul's other writings, in the New Testament, the goal for us is not to be these independent islands that don't need anything. The goal is for us to not be takers, but givers. That's our goal. Like we want to generate enough to take care of ourselves and then to take care of our neighbors. And that's God's heart. Like, so we don't just spend everything on ourselves, whether it be time, energy, money, and so we don't like barricade ourselves in with our stacks on stacks. Like, okay, I'm ready, for when everything goes down, it's like, okay, the goal is to have enough for yourself and then to be able to give to those who have need. And then on the other side, like you're saying, John, those who have need, be in process, to work away from that as God provides strength and opportunity. Like, don't be a taker forever. It's fine if you're on that side of things, and it's great. But then your goal is not, hey, I'm coasting now. It's, hey, I want to be productive. I want to contribute. I want to be able to help the people around me like I'm being helped right now.
I think
shout out.
Yeah, that's the cool part about that word balance of like, yeah, there's times when we need help. There is. And there's times when we can offer help, and not to be one-sided or, or on one side or the other side, but to have that balance. And I love the way that Ron closed his message out this weekend with the story about his father and the balanced life that he walked through discernment of the Holy Spirit. That example showed at his funeral when 400 plus people showed up, but yet his mother and himself never knew what his dad did at work because it wasn't all about his dad. I mean, that story right there is the true example of trusting in God, trusting the discernment of Holy Spirit while being balanced. I think that was fire how he plugged that in there.
100%. Well, boy,
I was just going to say shout out to Colby and her crew too, because I think they exemplify that. There is a season, everybody has them. There's a season when we're in need, and that's okay. And I think what I love about Colby and Kenneth and what they're doing with local and the finance forward stuff is, man, everybody's in need at one point or another, but let us help you not stay there. Let us help you figure out how to move forward. And I think even in recovery, you guys do that. People show up in need, but the goal isn't to leave them. The goal is that they would actually grow to the point where they're now in turn turning around and investing it in someone else. And that is what the gospel does. So
that's beautiful.
It's pretty cool.
Well, boys, on that note, we could talk for a while more, but it's time to wrap this up. Really, thanks especially to Brian for jumping in with us. Earl, great conversation. Next time we get you on, we're going to talk about fishing tips, though. That's the other knowledge area that you have that we didn't explore yet. So we'll get on some of that next time. Real quick, as we wrap up, Earl, maybe somebody's heard this conversation, connected with you and Brian a little bit, realized maybe you guys have something going on that could help them. What's the best way for them to connect with you guys?
Best way is my email is earl@heightschurch.com. I mean, that's the quickest way. Or you can call the church office and get a hold of me that way. Or we have a Facebook Elements page. Over the past 7 months, we've been recording weekly videos and posting on that. If any of that information strikes some questions in you, Brian, myself, and the serve team are always available 24/7 to take those calls. Either way, the cool thing is God has placed us in a spot to be available for others today. And we do it because others have come before us and been available for us. So now it's our time to give it back. So anyone, any questions, ideas, concerns, just hit up myself or Brian one way or another.
Beautiful.
Earl at heightschurch.com and Brian at heightschurch.com.
Beautiful. Yeah, and I hope they picked up. You guys are actually real human beings that are great to talk to. So it's not a weird churchy situation. You're pretty nice, normal guys. So take advantage of that. And if you have any other kind of needs as we wrap this up, you got any other kind of questions, whether it be an emotional need, spiritual need, financial need, we are here. It's part of our heart and our hope to extend the love and care we've received in our lives from Jesus and his church, and to pass that along. So you can always just send us an email to hello@heightschurch.com, and that's the start. We'll connect you with resources. We have a bunch of different ways we can offer help, from counseling, conversation, financial coaching, and so much more. So just want to put that out to you. Do not be shy. Don't be ashamed. We're here to help. Our heart is, just like this First Thessalonians says, for you to get help, get hope, and then move from needing to receive to being a giver, transformed by Jesus. That's what we're all about. So much love to you. Love being with you this week. Don't forget, lots of resources on this YouTube channel for you to take advantage of. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. And then we will see you tomorrow morning. We got morning coffee at 10 o'clock. It's live right here on this channel. And then don't forget, we got services right here on this channel as well, live at 10:30 and 6 p.m. on Sundays. Much love to you. Have a great week. We'll catch you next time. See you Sunday or right here again next Wednesday, if not before. Much love.